Morning, my name is Latislaw, and I'm here to talk about creativity and technology, and not only how you can become a better technologist by embracing creativity, but also a better human. So I know what you're probably thinking. I'm not creative. I have no idea how to create anything. I can't even draw a straight line. This is something I hear a lot from people I encounter when I start talking about this particular topic. And I used to think the same thing for a really long time. So going back to 2005 was the first time I even started thinking, well, maybe I'll play with drawing. And I wasn't very good back then, getting a little bit better now. But the idea is we just think that we're just not that creative, which I will hopefully show you throughout this talk that that's just not true. And if you think about the business of software engineering, we're not just copy pasting from Stack Overflow directly into our IDE and hoping everything works. At least I hope you're not doing that. We actually have to think. We use things, we research, we use them in new ways, and we come up with something that's new using the tools that we already have. So if you look at the definition of creativity, at its core, it's really a mindset. It's a way of thinking about the world where you're taking things that you already know and combining it in new and unique ways to create something, a solution to a problem that you're usually trying to solve in software anyway. It sounds a lot like innovation as well. And innovation is a word we throw around a lot, and everybody lauds this word, but for some reason creativity is almost kind of a dirty word. I don't really understand why that is, but hopefully I'll help you get comfortable with the concept of creativity. So one of the things that people think is you are either born with artistic ability or creativity or you're not. If you look at my drawing, it's a skill, by the way. It's not a talent that's inborn. So I drew this one just a few weeks ago of me, and that looks nothing like me, and it looks awful. And this one looks a lot more like my photo. And this is just from, so I don't have a job right now on purpose. Like I'm doing a creative sabbatical and drawing almost every day, all the time. But I went from there to there in just a matter of like a month and a half by using a specific book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And this book is pretty amazing just in general, and if you haven't read it, I highly suggest it. This was the book I first picked up in 2005, and it talks about all the brain science behind creativity and drawing and how to become an artist, essentially, and draw photos that are more photorealistic. But basically, the idea isn't this is how you draw a specific thing, like this is how you draw a house. It's this is how an artist sees and how an artist records the information they see in front of them. So the idea is using something like negative spaces. So with the scarf here, you might draw all the little skin parts around the scarf, and then the scarf ends up appearing out of that. So that's just one of the tricks that she teaches you in the book. But basically the point is it's a skill that you can actually work through. And creativity isn't only art. It really depends on which medium that you're interested in, but I've been playing a lot with drawing. And the reason why you can get a lot better at this is neuroplasticity. So this is the idea that your brain over time can create new pathways. And the more that you use them, the more you're able to access that even faster. So if you think about when you started using a new architecture pattern, for example, at first it was really slow. It was hard to figure out what should go where. You didn't know exactly how to use it, and you're getting used to it. But over time, you got much more familiar with it, and you knew exactly where to put everything. Same thing starts to happen with different skills that you're building. And with creativity, what I found is interesting is it isn't just, for example, with drawing, I'm not just more creative in drawing. I'm more creative in pretty much every area of my life, and it just kind of ends up everywhere, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint. I've got some benefits I'll talk through later, but it really just kind of helps in a lot of different areas of your life. Also, creativity, art, not the same thing. Art is usually some sort of expression of creativity, and creativity is there to help support the artist whenever they're coming up with what they're going to create. But again, creativity is more of a mindset. And if you look at the definition of art, I know it looks a little intimidating. It's like something that you would put up on the wall that Van Gogh did or whatever. But that doesn't have to be the only definition that we use of art. So if you look at this one sounds a lot more like what we do with our day-to-day. So it's the idea of we're building a skill over time and putting it into practice, and that's what we do with software engineering. Cool. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the benefits to creativity to you, or at least the ones that I've seen, which I think you'll also see if you end up picking up a creative habit. So first, as humans, we really like to express ourselves. We've been doing that forever. Cave paintings, writing, software, all of this is expression of who you are as a person. If you have two different software engineers writing the same problem, you're not going to come up with the same code from those people. So it is an expression of you, what your experiences are, what you've learned, and how you combine those into what you create on your day-to-day. My favorite part of this is learning how to access flow. So you've probably felt this where you're just coding along, you look up, it's like 6 hours later, and you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? This also happens in drawing and in photography and other things that you do, or like meditation or whatever. But basically the idea is you are really here in the moment right now and experiencing exactly what is happening in front of you. And you're fully engaged in the problem, you're interested, you're curious, and this flow is what we really like to have in software, because then we're basically building this huge picture in our head of the problem we're trying to solve, and as soon as a project manager comes over, that all comes crashing down. And that's the problem with flow. It is fragile. So if you can learn how to get into flow quicker, then that's a really useful technique that you can do. And I've found that with drawing, for example, they have this in the drawing on the right side of the brain, where you're doing this contour drawing, you're looking at your hand and then drawing, and that makes your left brain shut up and lets your right brain take over, and that's the one that kind of helps you see the bigger picture and put everything together in new and interesting ways. But basically, if you practice creativity, you can get into a mode where it's easier to access that instead of, spending 30 minutes trying to get back into the problem you were trying to solve. Also, I find that it's helped me think of different ways to solve problems, not just small problems here and there, but you can apply creativity to your life, for example. So I think I'm living a creative version of my life. Instead of just doing a job, making money, and then paying for my apartment, I am traveling the world and doing what I want to do and seeing what I want to see in the world. So it really helps you to see new opportunities and combine them in different ways to support what it is that you want to accomplish in your own life. I'm also getting better at spotting patterns more readily, and I really tend to see solutions that other people don't. I don't know if it's because I'm getting better at just figuring out what my assumptions are and ignoring society's expectations of what I should be doing. But as I find that the more I do, the more I'm able to find those interesting ways to embrace creativity in every area of my life. You can also do things like, for example, if you're learning how to draw, that'll help you in different ways with communicating with people who are more visual on your team, for example, artists, so the designers and the product managers. So that can be a super helpful thing as well. So it's not only your mind is expanded and you see new ways to do things, you're actually learning new skills, and then you're applying them in new and different ways to the work you do on a day-to-day basis. And with this concept of learning transfer, this is the idea that you learn something in one place and then it ends up applying in another. So when you're learning how to read, you're learning the letters and how to sound them out. But kind of the emergent property of that after you learn how to read is comprehension. So that's not something that they teach you in school. They don't teach you how to comprehend the text. They teach you what the things mean, and then you put it together into an overall whole. And this just emerges from you learning all the constituent parts, and then eventually you've got the larger idea where you can take and read something and understand exactly what the author was trying to get across. And one of my favorite examples of this is with Steve Jobs. So he studied calligraphy in college. He ended up dropping out, but eventually he founded Apple. So that knowledge that he learned about calligraphy way back then really influenced his thinking on not only beauty but also technology and how to make it accessible for most of the people in the world. So just learning about calligraphy has ended up imbuing, in basically throughout every area of his life and his life's work. Okay. So I've also found that my life has become much more sustainable. I've always been a big proponent of having work-life balance, but sometimes I can definitely get a little bit too into whatever I'm creating at work. So I find that it gives me an off switch. I really enjoy having a hobby that is not just coding at home. Actually, I don't think I've ever really gone home and just coded for fun. Most people I know in tech do, but not me. I don't go home and do open source. I go home and I write, or I go home and I go hiking in the woods or something like that. So I really enjoy unplugging. And I find that in those times, I actually have better ideas about stuff that I can use at work. But I'm not actually doing work. So if you give your brain time to be off, you end up getting more ideas. So I'm sure you've heard of like shower moments and things like that. So you're just in the shower and you're like, oh, great, this new idea. I can use this in a different way, or I'll go solve this whenever I'm at home. Or if you're working through a really hard problem at work, walking away from it usually helps you solve it. Because if you just stay there and bang your head against the desk, it's going to be a lot harder for you to actually get to the solution. So this one is the most surprising one to me. So now that I've been doing more creative stuff, doing photography, drawing, I'm seeing the world in a totally different way. So I will see smaller beauty throughout the world. So I'm walking along and there's graffiti and I really like it. Or there's this small plant growing out of a crack in the sidewalk. You know, these little small moments of beauty I now notice them more often. And then that has led to more gratitude and more appreciation for the things I'm doing in my life. And gratitude is pretty new to me, but it's definitely something that I find that has had a really big impact. And then once you're a little bit more grateful, then you start expressing that to people, and then people know how much you care about them. It's really good, just in general. I highly suggest practicing gratitude if you're not doing that already. And then finally, fun. I mean, it's a hobby, it's fun. You get to choose. I'll talk about which mediums you can play with later, just give you some suggestions on how to build a creative practice. But you're gonna find that you enjoy what you're doing. You're gonna try different things and learn new stuff, and you'll get better at it if you continue to practice it. So really, what's not to love here? All right, so now I'm gonna talk about how I think software engineering is actually creative at its core, and you're practicing creativity when you don't even think about it. So I'm gonna do a small exercise with everyone here, and I'm going to close my eyes too, but let us everyone close our eyes. So basically right now I'm going to give you a moment or two to start thinking about something, a problem that you're facing in your app right now. Maybe an architecture problem you want to do, or some sort of new feature that you want to build. So start thinking about that problem and how you want to solve it, or something you want to add to the app. So, did you think of anything? If you didn't, I bet if I put you in a room for 5 minutes and asked you to go think about stuff, you'd come up with something. That was a pretty short window of time. But I bet a lot of you did actually think of some things that you might want to tackle. That's creativity. That's using, right now, the base of the app and building upon that in a new and interesting way. So, in the business of software, basically, software at its core is taking something in the world and representing it. So if you start talking about science, the reductionism basically is taking a big problem that you're trying to solve, breaking it down into small parts, studying those, and trying to reason about the whole. Same thing is true in software. And in art, it's also true. What we do is we take something, let's say a sunset, and maybe you draw a line with a half circle on it. Now you've represented the sunset on a piece of paper. So the idea is trying to communicate the whole that you're talking about by talking about some of the smaller parts there. So we take something down and we break it down. We do that by creating abstractions and thinking about things in different ways. So so in software, for example, abstractions would be different architecture patterns that you can think about, or diagrams, or functional specs. All these sorts of things are ways that we're creating abstractions on what we want to model and what we want to create. So the concept of Gestalt is basically this is the emergent whole of something that you're breaking down. So this is an arty term. But basically, the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. So if you think about software, when you're writing your function, that's not the software that somebody touches. It's a bunch of different software engineers and other people working together to come to an app at the end of it. So the software ends up being bigger than all the small words you wrote into your IDE. And in the physical world, if you think about a building, it's made up of small bricks and mortar, but when you look at it, you say, oh, that's a building. You don't say, oh, okay, here are 6,000 bricks in this one little panel. So the idea is we build things based on smaller things, and then they become bigger than what they are. Basically, the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts, essentially. Also, in software, we have to work within constraints. So a lot of times that's time and money with projects. We have to build something. We have to have some sort of business value at the end of it. And we only have so many people to do it. So basically you have a toolbox that you're using, and there's already some subset of it that you can reuse. Some of it you have to go research, and you're combining it in new and different ways. But basically, having limited choices like that really helps you to become creative. So if your boss is like, I need this feature out in 3 weeks, and there's no way you can write everything that's in that feature, you start getting creative about what you can cut, how to simplify it, how you might want to write it in a different way, or what you can reuse to help you get to that end goal. So you end up having to be creative because now you've got a deadline, and it pushes you to think about things in a new way instead of just doing it linearly from A to B. And then going back to expression a bit, if you think about software engineering, I kind of think about it as writing prose or poetry or paragraphs. So when I'm writing my code, I want it to read like it's a sentence so I can understand, so people can understand what's happening basically in the system. And it's not just what I am doing, it's why I'm doing. I also use it to describe the context around a particular function or the things that I'm doing inside that function. So basically, we're trying to make sure that it's more readable for people down the road. And then finally, if you think about agile process, the way artists work is they go research, and then they find things that would help inform the thing that they're trying to build right now. And they might do sketches and small models, if they're going to do a sculpture, for example. And then at the end of it, they'll play with it, they'll prototype, and then they'll come up with their sculpture. We do the same thing. We do something, we iterate, we get feedback, we research, continue. So software has a lot of parallels to the creative and the art world as well. So this is the fun part. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about my creative path and how you can be a bit more creative as well and start choosing a medium that might be interesting to you. So basically, I said before I didn't think I was a very creative person. So I did play music in school, but for me that's just like, oh, I'm just reading something off of a piece of paper. But when I was in college, I started with drawing on the right side of the brain in 2005. So I played with it for a little bit and drew for like a year-ish, off and on, doing some art and stuff. But then I dropped it for 10 years and started focusing on photography. So I've mostly been doing photography since then. And the pictures in the background here are photos I've taken, for example, of graffiti I liked in Brazil. But yeah, basically, I was just playing with photography for a really long time. But then I go to a lot of conferences, obviously. And one of my friends in the Android space, I saw her doing a sketchnote in 2005. And I was like, oh, what is that? I want to do that. So I started doing sketchnoting. And actually, I'll show you. Hey, this is not clicking. So my first sketchnote is this one right here. So this is a little cringeworthy looking at it now. But basically, this was from a conference where it's like being more visible in writing, speaking, coding. And this is like power poses you can do before you give a talk so you feel more comfortable and in your space. But yeah, so I started sketchnoting, and then I really enjoyed it and worked on it a lot. So if you had told me that when I did a sketchnote like that my sketches eventually would look more like this, I would have thought you were crazy. So this is like basically a year and a half later, whenever I started doing it. So basically what happened with my sketchnoting is I was doing it at conferences first, and then I started doing it as my daily journal. So I keep a very detailed journal of what I'm doing at work, how I'm feeling, all that sort of stuff, things I'm doing, things I'm trying to solve. And then I started doing it as a sketchnote. So basically every single day ended up being a sketchnote instead of just writing really messy notes about what I was thinking and feeling. But that daily practice is really, that's pretty different from here's my original, and then here's where I am today. And then if you see me around the conference, and I'll show you some of my sketches, I'll probably be sketchnoting while I go to other talks as well. But basically, so that's where I kind of was. I was just doing sketchnoting, still had a job, all that sort of stuff. But now I've started doing a creative sabbatical. So what I've been doing for the last 3 months outside of conference speaking is going to museums, sketching, drawing, learning how to do whatever, gluing stuff to paper. Basically, I'm doing all sorts of different types of creative things just for the heck of it. We'll see if something comes out of it at the end. My hope is I'll figure out exactly what I want to do with my life. I don't know if I will or not, but I'm trying. We'll see. But at its core, one of the most important things, this is both good and bad news, is you're going to have to practice. That's the only way you're going to get better at any particular skill that you choose that you want to build. So when I was actually working at jobs, what I would do was wake up at 6 a.m., which, by the way, I really hate mornings. Mornings are not my thing. So I'd wake up at 6, and then I would exercise, and I'd wake up somewhere in the first mile or so. And then after exercising, I would go home, and then I would do art stuff. And I'd do that for 2 or 3 hours, and then get ready for work and start at 10. At the time, I had a remote job, so that was really nice. So I could just wake up, have 4 hours to myself to work on projects that I wanted to work on, drawings or whatever, and then after that, go do work. Because I found that if I tried to do it in the evenings, basically what would happen is I wake up, go straight to work, and then I'm totally drained by the time I get home, and I have nothing left for myself. It ended up being all for the company. So I reorganized my life to make sure that I had creativity as one of the most important pillars of what I was doing. So after you've kind of figured out how you want creativity to fit into your life, and back on this, daily's best, but you can do it like 3 times a week or whatever works for you. You can start small and then build it up from there. But then you're going to need to choose a medium. So there's really countless different mediums. Things I've been playing with on my sabbatical are basically cutting up magazines and then gluing them to pieces of paper in interesting ways. I've been drawing. So I also have an iPad with a pencil, so I've been using that with a lot of different brush strokes and stuff. So you can do real painting, watercolor, you name it, you can play with it. I like to go to an art store and just choose random stuff and then go home and play with it. I'm really a big fan of calligraphy as well. That's another thing you could play with. Or one of my favorite mediums, which we briefly talked about, is sketchnoting. So in the background here, this is this is some of the research I did when I was prepping for the first time I gave this talk. So basically, I watched a bunch of TED Talks and then drawing on the right side of the brain. But basically, what sketchnoting is taking what is being said and writing it down in an interesting way. So like there are some pictures in here, like I've got small little pictures, but for the most part, they're just larger words. So these are the main focus areas. So your inner critic down here, the great saboteur, So you don't have to make it all pictures all the time. It can be mostly words, but what I find whenever I do sketchnoting is that it really helps me to retain the information much better. It depends on what kind of learner you are, but you're kind of moving, so it's more kinetic and stuff. So it's hard to describe, but it basically uses your left and your right brain, and you're totally focused, and you don't get bored, which is a problem I usually have when I'm listening to talks. So it really helps you focus, and at the end of it, you have something pretty that you can look at later. So really, all around, it's kind of fun. And I've been doing this almost every day since like 2015, I think. So don't get discouraged by if you see my sketch notes. You can't compare your day one, you saw my day one, to my 2.5 years later. So again, this is day one. So this was stick figures. But if you look at it, basically over time, the idea is you can build up the skills if you decide that that's what you want to do. So you will encounter a little bit of anti-doodling bias, though. People will kind of think that you're not paying attention, that you're wasting time, especially in corporate meetings. I just ignore them and do it anyway. But what's really cool about sketchnoting is that the science shows that you're 29% more likely to remember content if you're doodling. They don't have this specifically for sketchnoting, but if you're just like making random marks while you're listening to a talk, you're more likely to remember the information, because you're processing the information in more than one way, basically, is what's happening. So you're going to find that your inner critic is going to find all sorts of ways to tell you that you suck, that you shouldn't do something. Not only in the moment when you're drawing, because that's a big problem for me anyways, when I start with a white piece of paper. It's just intimidating. And then you start and you're like, that doesn't look like a finger. Why are you doing that? And your brain just keeps saying mean things to you over and over again until you stop doing it. But there are ways to get around the inner critic. And that was one of the really interesting things from Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain book, is basically she has a process to bore the critic, so it just disappears. So, for example, you turn a photograph upside down and draw it as if, basically, let's take a picture, I don't know, I guess of Einstein. Turn it upside down. If you looked at it upright, you might try and sketch it and it'll look probably awful. But if you turn it upside down, after a while, your left brain's like, that doesn't look like a face. What am I looking at? Why are you doing this to me? And eventually it just goes away. And then you can get into the flow, and then you can just kind of draw and see what you're, the different pieces that you are using. And like, basically, it's really interesting because the right brain kind of helps you get the full picture and how things connect. So that's what makes it look a little bit better whenever you're creating. But besides the I'm sitting down at a blank page, this is really hard version, you might find also that you're finding excuses to not do creative stuff. It's like, oh, well, I've got to go to the grocery store and buy blah, blah, blah. Or I should do this instead. Or that's not very productive. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that. So you'll find it both at a small level and also at a meta level too. Your critic's going to try and thwart as much as possible you getting into that flow and doing things that are more creative. So one thing I like to do whenever I'm having trouble solving a particular coding problem that's frustrating me, I don't know how to solve it, what I do is start drawing pretty pictures, is what I call it. So I go to a whiteboard and I'll start drawing diagrams or start coloring things or whatever. And I really find that helps me get around a mental block that I have. So that's another way that I've been using creativity and art. And then, for example, with this talk, when I first started researching it, I didn't want to do it because I'm scared of public speaking. I do it anyway. But it's really hard to get over the procrastinator part of it. So what I did was like, oh, well, I'm going to start doing sketch notes. So then I did sketch notes on stuff that kind of helped me refine what I wanted to talk about over time. So I tricked myself into writing the talk by doing things that I thought that were more fun instead of like research. So it's like, oh, I get to do a sketch note. Let's go do that. As far as finding sources of inspiration, it's everywhere. So I like to look at YouTube videos to help me do drawing. There's all sorts of artists on there doing all sorts of different mediums. So that's a really great place to start because it makes it a lot more approachable too when you start to see how people are creating the drawings. Because if you look at the end thing, it's just super overwhelming. But if you look at all the stages to how they got there, then you're starting to think, oh, well, I could do that too. It's just a little square first, and then I kind of added some hair on the edges, and then I shaded some. So you'll find that whenever you learn how people build stuff, it'll make it a lot easier for you to be able to build stuff. With the iPad, I use an app called Procreate that keeps track of every single stroke I make. So all the drawings that I've done on the iPad, it has a video basically of how I created it. So I have a Tumblr, which is colasketches.tumblr.com. And basically I have all the making of videos usually for the things I create, and it'll show you, like if you saw the picture of me earlier that I drew of myself, that looks pretty impressive. But if you saw where I started with it, it's not that impressive. It builds over time into that image. So obviously you can do things like read books, there's creative podcasts, all sorts of movies. A friend of mine, her creative process is to wake up and then she'll either start drawing immediately or maybe watch a documentary or a movie about creativity, and then she'll do something from that. She also likes podcasts a lot. I find it harder to get into podcasts, but I think a lot of people like them. So that's definitely something I would suggest if that's something you're into. And then also, I took this class earlier this year called Drawing Games, but it wasn't drawing at all. Basically, it was a bunch of different ways to get new and creative sources of inspiration. So one of the things we did was a collection walk. So we walked around, I live in San Francisco, so I walked around San Francisco, and other people in the class, they would pick up leaves or something like that while they were walking around, things that interested them. For me, I guess I kind of sketch noted or whatever. I sketched some things that I found interesting, some graffiti and things like that. Other people took photos. But basically you can go out with a theme, and I'm going to take photos of things that are orange today. And then at the end of it, you have some sort of body of work potentially if you do that over time. And then the one I want to work on, I don't know how to do this yet, is meeting new people that are in the art space. Most of my friends are techies, so I really need to change that. But I think that there's places where they hang out. So I need to figure out where they hang out and then go there and then start making some friends, hopefully. But yeah, so I guess you could go to galleries and stuff. Gallery openings, maybe. Maybe that's where you meet them. Don't know. And then one of the things that someone had suggested to me early on was basically sharing your process. It's scary. It's super scary. I think my drawings suck for the most part. I think they're getting better now. But up until like 2 months ago, I would have been like, oh, my drawings suck, I hate sharing them. But I've been sharing them since I shared that first sketch note back in 2005. So it's kind of now a compulsion, I guess, I don't know. But it also like helps you let go of the perfectionism and just get what you have out in front of other people so you can get reactions to it. And nobody has said, you suck, please don't do that ever again, why are you doing this? Actually, I get a lot of positive feedback, especially around sketch notes. And I find that I interact with a lot more people in the community because they're seeing the sketch notes and they're really excited about seeing a visual representation of a talk that they either attended or were unable to attend. So I've made actually a lot of friends that way. So it's really cool to get it out there and share. I wouldn't suggest Tumblr probably. It's not very fun to try and find my old sketches, like scrolling through it. It's a nightmare. But that's just where I started, so that's where I am for now. Maybe Pinterest? I don't know. Up to you where you would want to share those. But I also share them on Twitter. But I have the same searchability problem with Twitter. I want something that's more of a visual collection of all of them so I can look and show people, like, this is the progression of things I've been doing. And then it really makes you, because you kind of forget where you are. You're like, oh, I still suck. But if you look at something you did a year ago, you're like, wow, I'm way better than that. So it's kind of nice to see that visual progression somewhere. And then finally, play with new stuff. Go to the art store, buy random things, combine them in new ways. Basically, anything that you do ends up being a lot of fun. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece. You don't even have to share it like I suggested. I think it's useful to help you let go of the inner critic so that you can actually get things out there and start creating and shipping stuff. But if it scares you so much that you won't start, don't do that. But basically, just experiment. It all counts. It's all fun. Do it for yourself. Don't do it for anyone else. It doesn't matter what other people think about it. It's really about how it makes you feel and the different benefits that you're going to get out of it if you continue to practice it down the road. But basically, creativity is not just for artists. That really gives you a whole new way of thinking and relating to the world. And like I mentioned, some of the benefits that I've noticed, basically I'm able to better tap into the flow. I like my life more. I have a better work-life balance. I'm finding beauty in everything. It's kind of weird, but it's great. And it also, it really just helped me enjoy the here and now and being in the moment and appreciating what's going on around me. So I really hope that I've convinced you to at least start trying to play with any medium you like, and I can't wait to see what you create. Thank you so much. Are we doing questions or?